We are back. We're live with another episode of The Dictators, and I'm delighted to be joined by my co-host, David Debato. We are building this format up. We're hopefully going to get a loyal audience for this, but so much is happening. We think it's incredibly important to have these daily half-hour touch points, and of course, more than half an hour when the occasion warrants it, as it did yesterday. Today, we're turning back on Ukraine, the war in Ukraine. But there's so much going on, we're going to have to mention it, but a couple of different things in that context. But the real focus, I think, is going to be Russia has launched the largest aerial assault on Ukraine of the war, nearly 1,000 drones. Many of you have seen the pictures from Lviv. The historic heart of Lviv was hit, I suspect, quite intentionally. We'll unpack that. Ukraine, however, is striking back and delivering a message both to Russia that it does not have total impunity or immunity. And if it punches Ukraine, it must expect to be punched back. This, however, is also a message for the orange tyrant in the White House, the mentally adult toddler tyrant in the White House. This is a message to him that he cannot foist an unreasonable peace on Ukraine. He cannot give Ukraine to Russia. He cannot throw Ukraine under the bus. Ukraine has cards and it will not submit to threats. But it does seem that the US is very much putting forward the Russian point of view in the so-called negotiation process. Well, we're going to unpack all of this. David, over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, we're going to be focusing more or less on Ukraine today, touch on a couple of other things, as he said, but it'll be the primary focus for today. I do have my own YouTube channel, which I love to plug as regularly as possible. It's No Delusion Zone, No Delusion Zone on YouTube. So I really highly recommend folks scroll over to that, No Delusion Zone. And if you like it, which I hope you do, I'd like you to do this. Do a little like and subscribe. The same thing with my my Substack, which is Protecting the Republic, protectingtherepublic.com on my Substack. Please go there. And again, do a little bit of these, like and subscribe. Other than that, I want to jump into a couple of things very briefly that I want to put out there before we get into what's going on in Ukraine. In the United States right now, as many of you know, if not all of you, the MAGA folks under Donald Trump are deconstructing, which is another way of saying destroy our constitutional republic, our democracy, by destroying, really just dismantling our pillars, the foundational pillars that make us a democracy, or at least used to. One of them was the press. And one of our most esteemed, historic, and oldest media platforms in the United States was CBS Radio, CBS in general, but CBS Radio, which started almost 100 years ago. Well, that's going away. At the end of May, CBS Radio is going to be no more because the Ellison family, under father and son, have been dismantling CBS after they bought it. They now own CBS as well as Paramount and some other major media platforms in the United States. This is Edward R. Murrow, one of our most famous radio journalists in history at the beginning or during World War II, actually. And this is another photo of the original studio for CBS in New York. I think this was taken in the 30s, 20s or 30s, probably the 30s. But again, it's going away. It's another death blow to freedom of the press. They've been attacking 60 Minutes on CBS. Many of their most famous, esteemed journalists have quit in protest, and CBS is just a sad shadow of what it used to be, Jonathan. So I'm very, very sad about that. And so I don't want to get any more involved in that, but we're going to launch into Ukraine right now. And I want to follow up briefly on what you said, because I know you've got a lot of information on what's going on in and around Ukraine. And the Ukrainians did hit another site near Povrovsk, which is the Ust-Luga oil terminal. And I have a very brief video on that, which should make some folks pretty happy. Well, here's a photo of that, but let me scroll down to the video. This is the actual strike taken by a resident. So that is what's going. That was what's going on right now. I'm very happy to hear that, and I know Jonathan's going to fill in some more information about the strikes that Ukraine is making, pretty much doing this to Donald Trump and NATO, and saying, "You look, we have to do what we have to do, and if you're not going to help us, we're going to do it ourselves with our own ingenuity, our own bravery, and our own strategy." And that's exactly what's going on. One story that I don't know if you were even familiar with, Jonathan, is that some drones hit in Estonia last night. They
Yes.
drones from Russia hit Estonia's I can't pronounce it correctly, Avwer power plant. One crashed in Latvia, but that was pretty much, I think, a Ukrainian drone from the strike we just saw. But a Russian drone attacked the Estonia's airspace and hit the chimney of the Avwer power plant in Estonia. Their internal security service said. So the war is expanding. The hybrid war is expanding. That didn't get hardly any press at all, any media, which I think it's rather important. That's all I have to say at the beginning.
Yeah,
right
no,
now.
this is super important. I did an item on it was 2 days ago where a drone, which looked like it was a Russian drone that had come from Belarus, crashed onto a frozen lake in, I think it was Lithuania or Latvia. Now, it turns out that actually that was, or it has claimed to be, a Ukrainian drone that peeled away from the group of drones that were going to Ust-Luga and Primorsk. And it looks like it malfunctioned and crashed in an uninhabited area. Originally, it was thought that that was a Russian drone coming from Ukrainian territory, part of the hybrid attack.
Right.
But that story did highlight some interesting things, and that is that Russia is prepping a whole bunch of new drone control centers in Belarus, potentially to coordinate its offensive actions against Ukraine, but also they have a dual use here. They could also be used to hit or coordinate strikes against Eastern Europe, especially the Baltics, Nordics, etc. It's my firm belief that this is scaling up, that it will scale up, that it always was going to scale up, for as long as we do not push back against Russia, for as long as we give them impunity, and for as long as the US gives them geopolitical coverage. And, you know, we'll talk in a minute about how Ukraine is striking back, but I think the big flip here, and we've had a couple of voices. There's one very well-known sort of business and political consultant, a Ukrainian in the US, who's been saying that his sources suggest that behind the scenes, the US has, you know, the mask is off. There's no pretense that they are negotiating an equitable and reasonable and sustainable peace, that they are out and out advocating Russian talking points. You would have seen this earlier in the week. This statement of, you know, just give us Donbass and we will build you a paradise that you can't even imagine. Well, the reason you can't imagine is because it's total bullshit. It's a lie. It's rubbish. It's nonsense. It's,
it's AI slop.
It's AI slop. It's Trump promising a ballroom and leaving you with a hole in the ground once he tore down the east wing of the White House. This is what the man does. He destroys and he lies. And he grifts.
Yeah, he does. Talking about grifts, and I don't know if you set me up on purpose, but two of the best grifters under Donald Trump are Steve Witkoff and Jared the Crook Kushner.
Witless Witkoff and Crooked Kushner.
Yeah, absolutely. And they are, of course, the two main, I hate to use the word negotiators, Jonathan. They are the two people that are speaking to Russia to try to end the war in Ukraine. It's such a travesty that these people are doing this. For those that don't know, for the two people out there that may not know, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner have absolutely zero diplomatic experience, military experience, intelligence experience, any experience to be doing anything like this. They are real estate moguls, multi-billionaires.
I was going to say real estate schmucks because
schmucks. I hate to use the word schmuck because I consider myself a schmuck. That's giving them too much credit.
Right.
I'm a schmuck with an attitude. They don't even have an attitude or a brain. But those are the people that are dealing with Russia on the behalf of the United States, not Ukraine, believe me, but on behalf of the United States. And it's just a travesty. Let me, for example, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are both in violation of what's called two statutes, at least, the Logan Act. And that, very briefly, Jonathan, bars private citizens from negotiations with foreign countries unless they're authorized by the government. Well, you say Trump has authorized these two schmucks to negotiate for the United States government. That's true, which leads us to the next problem in the Constitution. It's called the Foreign Emoluments Clause, and that prohibits authorized personnel that deal with foreign governments from accepting or receiving any gifts of any value at all from these foreign entities. It's no secret that both Kushner and Witkoff have been negotiating again and getting deals for themselves in Russia, real estate deals for years. They're in Mar-a-Lago now talking about real estate deals for themselves, not trying to negotiate a peaceful and equitable end to the war in Ukraine. This is not only illegal, unconstitutional, it's disgraceful, and they're traitors. They should be indicted and imprisoned instead of allowed to negotiate for us in Ukraine, but they're not. And this is just another sign of how far we have fallen in the United States, that they can so blatantly violate the Constitution, stab Ukraine in the back, one of our strongest and best, or should be one of our strongest and best allies, and get away with it, Jonathan, in plain sight. And the media, again, the mainstream media, just falling down on the job, not hammering away at this every waking minute.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? And we also see that many of the announcements vis-a-vis what's happening in Iran are not just, the usual, Trump says this and backtracks and whatever. That's sort of, if they even cover it at all, that's the angle they're covering it with. But with the market movements and people making extraordinary,
Yes.
I would say, placements and purchases, it's quite clear that what you're seeing is market manipulation through the lens of geopolitics in an extraordinary fashion. Now, that in itself, surely the people who are placing those orders should be immediately investigated by the FEC and various other bodies. So it seems that the whole system of accountability and democratic governments has just literally broken down top to bottom, which is extraordinary. The question is then whether the negotiations are being carried out in a similar fashion. The press focuses on the sound bites, the hollow sound bites. It's a negotiation. It's this, it's that. We're talking about security guarantees. Ukraine is forced to play along with those sound bites, the tone, the pattern, etc., pretending it's a genuine process that's leading towards something realistic. You and I are looking at this thinking there is no peace. Russia continues to strike. Russia has no interest in peace whatsoever. Its system could not cope with the shock of a sudden peace. It would collapse like some kind of pyramid scheme, house of cards, or whatever you want to call it. So the whole thing is just hollow. Might there, however, be some serious grift behind the process that means we should actually be paying attention to it?
Well, absolutely. Again, the mainstream press, as usual, has fallen down about around this. But you know what? I'm not going to say I don't blame them, because I do. But they have been the one of the main targets of the Trump administration, of MAGA, meaning the press, the media in the United States. Look, the story I just told you about CBS. They've been gutted. One of our most esteemed media platforms in the history of the United States is gone, essentially. And so just about all of the media platforms, the mainstream media, the whether it's digital or traditional paper, whatever, they're afraid. And some of the very, very best journalists have left. They're doing podcasts or they're doing something else. They're not reporting or investigating the stories that they used to. So one of the very main pillars that supported our democracy from the very, very beginning has been shattered. and it's basically gone. So no, they're not following up on this at all. And this is a grift. Somebody, I just want to reply to one of the viewers here about the Logan Act. Yes, it's very old, and essentially nobody's ever been convicted of that. And there's a reason for that, in my opinion. It's not that all American leaders have been so honest. No, we've had some pretty shady folks in our history, but nothing like this. And anybody that doesn't realize that this is a new dark chapter in the history of the United States is got blinders on. No administration, I'm talking about the Trump administration, MAGA, has been as out and out openly corrupt as we're seeing now. So if there's ever been a reason to prosecute anybody under the Logan Act and many, many other unconstitutional actions that have been taking place, this is the time. Not under the Trump administration, after the next elections, if they are actually held fairly, if the Republicans don't control them and count the votes, if we have a Democratic House and hopefully a Democratic Senate, then they should prosecute these clowns, these criminals, to the full extent of the law. I'm doubtful if that will happen, but I'm hopeful.
And of course, there is another thing that is up and coming, which you briefly mentioned yesterday, and this is that Steve Bannon, once again, through, I don't know whether it is hubris, arrogance, or the feeling that he has absolute impunity, has said the quiet part out loud, that the testing of ICE in airports, the wide-scale deployment in airports as following on from the terror intimidation we saw on the streets, that all of this really is just a dress rehearsal for gerrymandering the election, terrorizing voting queues, etc. He's basically said, yeah, corrupt too.
Well, yeah. And since we talked about this originally, I think it was Monday, and ICE was deployed to a few airports. They have now been, as I predicted, deployed to more airports. And they will probably, if what happens, what I think is going to happen, they will be the primary security force at most American airports pretty soon. The reason I say that, the Department of Homeland Security is still not funded. There's an impasse. The government has been undergoing a partial shutdown since about the middle of February. DHS has not been funded. TSA, the Transportation Security Agency, which is our security folks at the airport, haven't been paid. They've gone, I don't know if it's 2 or 3 paychecks now. Half of them are calling in sick at least. Many more are quitting. So I predict that if this budget impasse isn't solved very, very soon, ICE is going to be the undertrained, violent, brutal, well-armed thug service, secret police, that are going to be in charge of security at all American airports. This is not a good thing, Jonathan. It's certainly not the face of America that people should see the first time they're visiting our country, but I fear that that's what's going to happen.
I mean, let's face it, the border control agents at airports were not known to be, dare I say it, the most friendly in terms of interface, and a lot of people have stories about some fairly cold treatment, let's say, at the border, but they don't necessarily go around just mugging people, shooting people, piling on, beating up innocent people, simply because of their appearance, skin color, etc., or they looked at them funny. Well, this is the kind of stuff that we are going to start seeing, and probably at some scale.
Do you know what the current training is for ICE now?
Oh, you said it was just a couple of days. I mean, it's almost nothing.
A couple of days would be even worse. But no, it went down to about 3 months. It's a base called Glencoe, Georgia. It's the federal base where they train all federal police forces, security forces, many of them. It used to be about 3 months. I believe it was 12 weeks or so, 12, 14, 16 weeks. It's now 4 weeks. 4 weeks. Yeah. You cannot train someone to do the complex job of what they're supposed to be responsible for in 4 weeks, especially now that they are recruiting basically anybody, whether or not they have a GED, whether or not they have any critical thinking skills or not, whether or not they have minor convictions, criminal convictions on their record, whether or not they have Nazi tattoos on their arms. These are all being recruited and given 4 weeks of laughable training and pushed out on the street, heavily armed with a mask. come on. You don't have to be a genius to know that this is a recipe for failure. This is Trump's secret police force, his brown shirts.
And, we've asked this question before. Where did all the Proud Boys go? Where did all these paramilitary sort of KKK type groups, where do they all and militia, where do they all just vanish to? Well, it's quite clear where they vanished.
Yeah.
They are all now wearing ICE uniforms, being paid extraordinary amounts of money. And I'm guessing there's quite a few January 6thers in there as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. You're seeing the armed militias, many of which took part in January 6th. And then, of course, pardoned by Trump. These include revolutionaries, child molesters, murderers, rapists, bank robbers, all kinds of not very nice people that were arrested after January 6th, pardoned. And not all, of course, but many of them are now proud members of ICE, where they can act out on their racist violence with the security of the national or the federal government behind them. And what has the DOJ said and the DHS? They are completely immune from any criminal acts, any acts at all that they do on duty. So they're free to beat people up, shoot them. They've murdered people, as we know, and all under the color of the law. So this is a disgrace. I don't see it getting any better unless the Democrats win in November, but that's debatable too.
Let's turn back to Ukraine, because tomorrow we're going to get onto the topic of the land war, the ground war, which is still on the horizon. The troops are still heading towards that. Let's cover that tomorrow. There may be some more, news and coverage as that gets closer to reality.
Absolutely.
There's Trump's absurd statement saying that he's in very fruitful dialogue with the Iranians, and then they're flat out denying it. He then said that he's getting some kind of extraordinary gift from them. That's even amongst his supporters, that's got people scratching their heads a little bit. It's launched a lot of memes of Troy-type horses. It's a gift to memes, and obviously it's not a gift to the concept of peace and law. But behind the scenes, we have these so-called negotiations happening. More and more of the noises coming out of that suggest that there's some kind of tacit agreement, which we've sort of seen the outline of, we've hinted at, we've discussed whether it exists. That tacit agreement would have been, okay, US, you can go in and grab Maduro, but don't go for full regime change. The tacit agreement that, yes, you can hit Iran's nuclear bases, as happened 6 months ago, but actually we're going to work with them to hide all that stuff, so you're not going to get it anyway. So it seems that behind the scenes there are these kind of little quid pro quos taking place, which are highly performative, but don't necessarily change too much in the world order. Absolutely suits Moscow. The superficial image of sort of chaos and stuff happening and whatever, masking maybe coordination behind the scenes is exactly what they actually excel at, as opposed to ground warfare, which they don't, as we've seen in Ukraine. But you also have this negotiation and more indicators that in Alaska, before, during, and after, the US has sort of tentatively said, yeah, we will get you Donbass. We will get you Donbass and we will hand it over. And there's some kind of agreement around that. What are you sensing here? And how far is the US now blatantly just pushing Russian objectives?
Well, I think it's blatantly clear based on what we just said. The Trump administration, as well as his two goons that are supposedly negotiating with Russia, have never been interested in any type of fair negotiations for Ukraine. That much is very clear. They have only ever been looking for a deal. You don't do deals when you're talking about diplomacy. You don't do deals when you're talking about international law and security. You do negotiations. It's give and take. It's compromise. It's very long and drawn out. But Trump doesn't do that. He does deals because he's not a diplomat. He doesn't have a military or an intelligence or law enforcement or really any kind of a background other than being a corrupt real estate mogul. And so he's got two other corrupt real estate moguls working under him. So the answer is very clearly, Jonathan, I like to break it down because to me, it's not complicated. They are looking for personal deals. They are looking to enrich themselves and their families with deals, real estate deals, and maybe mineral deals in Russia. Therefore, they've been blowing smoke since they started, since at least last January 20th, when he came into power, about negotiating with Putin, negotiating with the Kremlin, going back and forth. But he hasn't been very open about that either. We all remember the shouting match in the Oval Office last year between him and Zelensky. So they really haven't been very secretive about their goals, which is to humiliate Zelensky, put Ukraine behind the eight ball where they have no choice but to surrender to Russia, essentially, whether total capitulation or at least the Donbass, and just call it a day. So Trump can build them the paradise that he's now promised in the Donbass. So to me, Jonathan, it's very clear. They are looking for personal deals that will enrich them even more. They are delaying the negotiations and drawing them out as much as possible, putting out tidbits of nonsense here and there for the totally unqualified Western media who fawns upon them. But essentially, it's doing Putin's bidding. They are going to do what Putin asked them to do, to the everlasting disgrace of the United States. And I think, I have to say this right now, Zelensky, he always got it. But I think now he's to the point where he knows he has to tell Trump to go pound sand and to do what he needs to do to save Ukraine. And that if that means going against the United States and losing some of the very few benefits that are left, like intelligence sharing, then he's going to have to do that because he ain't going to give up the Donbass and he's not going to totally capitulate to Putin. That's just never going to happen.
There we go. I'm unmuted now. This is tricky, isn't it? Because we have European leaders who are sort of pushing back through their inaction, through not getting involved in his Hormuz Straits convoys, which would be an act of considerable self-harm, dare I say it. You have, however, Mark Rutte, who I've always said he's the wrong choice, the wrong man at the wrong time. I've always said that he's a slippery politician with no principles. He's now going far beyond that in a way that does not surprise me, but seems to shock some people. I don't know. Maybe they don't see the world the way I do. This man is weak. He exudes weakness. He has been appeasing Trump all the way through, mirroring his body language, mirroring his tone, his language, being obsequious. Well, now he's gone far further, and he is saying that Europe will make commitments that they clearly won't, that will make commitments that are strategically stupid, that are self-destructive, that in some instances may also be construed as illegal. This man is dangerous, and he also seems to be absolutely aligned in his appeasement of Trump. This is not the character you need
I have
to
a brief,
be strong against
soundbite,
Russia.
A clip that I'd like to play, not yesterday, but fairly recently, following up exactly on what you're saying. It's only about a minute long, so please bear with me. And this is the best of Mark Rutte.
I think NATO's making a very foolish mistake, and I've long said that, I wonder whether or not NATO would ever be there for us. So this was a great test, because we don't need them, but they should have been there.
The president continues to frame this as sort of like a quid pro quo, and he's also mentioned Ukraine in the same context, saying, I help Europe with Ukraine. Why aren't they helping me? Are you worried that this is going to hurt NATO's goals elsewhere?
What I know is that we always come together. It was under President Trump's leadership that we had the extremely successful summit in The Hague, where we agreed to spend 5% of our GDPs on defense, and therefore equalizing for the first time since Eisenhower.
Yes.
So this is quite some time back in history, equalizing what the Europeans are spending and what the Americans are spending. Not only because it is fair that we all spend the same, and this was a wish from Trump 45 and now it's Trump 47. He got this done, but also because we need it, because of the Russian threat and our other adversaries. Then on Ukraine, it is again the US providing critical intelligence support and a weapons flow, working together with the Europeans to secure Ukraine's fight against the Russians, making sure they have what they need. And now with Iran, I'm absolutely convinced. And I understand the president's frustration that it takes some time. But again, I also ask for some understanding, because nations had to prepare for this, not knowing, and for good reasons, about the initial attack on Iran. But now coming together to make sure that we can be able to secure the Strait of Hormuz.
What an asshole.
Yeah.
I will leave you to follow up with those eloquent words.
I mean, there's nothing there. It's like trying to grab morning mist. There's no substance to the man whatsoever. But what you have is an extraordinary obsequiousness towards Donald Trump in particular. I have a feeling that he would not be quite so obsequious to a traditional American leader. But, you know, you cut your cloth according to the requirement here. And he knows that if he's going to preserve his job is to be head of NATO. If he's going to keep that fat paycheck and that influence on the world stage, the attention of journalists, and that sort of presence in fora like the White House or wherever, well, he won't be allowed to do that if NATO falls apart, if the US abandons NATO, or if NATO has to make tough choices to form a far more action-led organization, a sort of coalition of not just the willing, but those who are willing to take action. Well, he's deferring that point of decision making. He's deferring any sort of tough leadership stance because he's not the man to do that. He knows it. He is keeping his seat warm for his own managerial, self-interested, but frankly, that's my take on it.
Well, I mean, obviously being on the right side of history and doing the right thing doesn't matter to him. He's way beyond that.
Yeah.
Don't you believe, though, that he could keep his seat, keep his job, keep his paycheck if he actually was more loyal to NATO, more loyal to Europe and Ukraine than blowing smoke up Trump's ass? Excuse me. Don't you think that would endear him to them? Maybe problems in the short run, but in the long term, it would make him look far more credible than what he's doing by propping up Trump.
But it's a risk and it's hard work and it takes a lot of imagination and courage. He doesn't have any of these qualities, and I think he's fully aware of it.
No, he doesn't.
And there is a risk there. The risk is that there are, I would say, sort of fundamental problems in the architecture of NATO. The main military leadership comes from the US, but it is a combined command where you're not going to, I mean, Trump doesn't understand how this works whatsoever. He thinks just because there's an American there at the top, everyone else is going to sort of, yes, sir, and do what they say. Well, it doesn't work anything like that. There's an extraordinary sort of consensus architecture within it. Yes, normally there's an American leading it, but really all the decisions made have to be consensual across all the members and participants, say, in operations and so on. So this is far too subtle for Trump. It's not how he views how the world works in any circumstance. The minute you start to say, no, we are not going to support Trump, we're not going to do this, that, and the other, we're not going to pull NATO into an illegal war for which actually NATO doesn't exist. NATO exists for countries that are attacked, not countries that get themselves into trouble by attacking others. It's not how NATO works in any sense whatsoever. Or countries such as the US that have threatened NATO members in the last year, which they have, Denmark and Greenland. But the minute you start pointing this out, the minute you start saying the emperor has no clothes, you have fundamental decisions to make. One of those fundamental decisions may be that the US, with its equipment and its money, leaves the alliance.
Well,
And then what are you going to do?
I'd like to close out on this, talking about Ukraine, talking about NATO and the EU. And this is a story that just came out in the last 24 hours, that the EU delays their own proposal to ban Russian oil. They're still debating banning Russian oil amid the Iran war. They've postponed it. They were supposed to take a vote the first week of April. They've just now said, maybe not. We like to keep Russian oil. We love to keep buying that so we can supply the Russian war machine some further and kill more Ukrainians. If I could, Jonathan, at the very end here, can I play just another brief clip on that? It addresses this issue directly.
This will prompt Ukrainian response. They ultimately will have to defend themselves and can defend themselves. And if Europe doesn't make these tough decisions, well, Ukraine is going to make those decisions for us in a kinetic fashion.
Please watch this clip, a brief clip of a mealy-mouthed EU representative.
The European Commission has delayed the presentation of a highly anticipated proposal to permanently ban the imports of Russian oil, as the war in the Middle East continues to send shockwaves across energy markets and keep the Brent barrel over $100. It also comes amid a tense standoff with Hungary and Slovakia, the only two member states that still buy Russian oil, over the Soviet-era Druzhba pipeline.
I do not have, first of all, a new date to give. What I can reassure you of is that we remain committed to making this proposal. What the President has been very clear on is that going back to importing Russian energy would be repeating a mistake from the past. It would be a strategic blunder. So we have successfully already put in place and enforce the repower gas regulation, which already banned, as from last Wednesday, the new short-term and long-term gas contracts, and we are determined to continue with other energy forms as well.
The legislation, which is part of the Repower EU roadmap, was tentatively scheduled to be unveiled on the 15th of April, but the date has now been removed from the calendar. The Commission insisted the change in timing did not mean a change in policy, saying the proposal had not been cancelled and would still be published, though no longer by the mid-April date.
What can I say? NATO falling down again, or not in this case, the EU.
Everything gets kicked off into the long grass. We had the same problem in dealing with Hungary, even though that it's now out there in public that Hungary has been essentially spying for Russia in all key strategic meetings, but there's a lack of willingness to deal with that. If this was a nation state, these people would be traitors.
Yes.
If this was Britain, they'd be shipped off to the Tower of London, and quite rightly. They have betrayed the strategic interests of Europe to its key adversary, Russia, which is intent on destroying the EU, destroying European integrity, and if it can, take over European nations. So we constantly create a noose for our own necks, and the inability to deal with all this stuff simply it provokes and enables the aggressors to go further with their aggression. At the end of this episode, that is what we're going to see. We saw the largest strike on Ukraine in the context of the war yesterday, almost 1,000 drones. This is not a one-off. Russia is now going to create that as the benchmark, the baseline for what it tries to achieve day in and day out. They may not be at that point yet, but they will build towards that point of production so they can inflict that kind of horror day in, day out. If AfD gets in Germany, if Farage gets in the UK, then any hopes of putting any legislation to block Russian hydrocarbons not only will be over, but the sluice gates will be opened to allow that filthy blood hydrocarbons back in and to pay for our own destruction. We are, as we have been for some time, on the point of a very existential threat. The Ukrainians are not just experiencing as an existential threat, they're experiencing as a kinetic and lethal threat day in, day out. And I am deeply ashamed of many of the pathetic politicians who claim to lead us, but in fact do nothing of the sort.
And as always, it comes down to money. Greed rules all. Apparently, that's never changed. If anything, it's worse than ever. The haves, who are very few in number, rule over the have-nots, who they're determined to crush and really just don't give a damn. And unfortunately, that's where we're at in near the end of March 2026, Jonathan.
It is. We're in a dangerous place, an extremely dangerous place. We'll pick this up again tomorrow when we will talk about the likelihood of a ground invasion of the what's it called? Something or other island in
Karg.
Slipped by mine. Karg Island. That's it.
By these folks here, which is the 82nd Airborne Division. By the way, the shirt I'm wearing, I was attached to the 82nd briefly in Iran with my military intelligence brigade. In Iraq, excuse me. I didn't get to go to Iran, although that was talked about when I was in Iraq, believe it or not. We were just going to keep marching on to Tehran.
Yeah, I mean, David, the way this is going, you're not necessarily out of the
no, I make it
you're not out of the call up framework.
Absolutely. But the 82nd has not only been given their alert orders, they've deployed, they're gone. They've left Fort Bragg, which is where I was stationed for a while as well, and they are en route to their staging area, which means where they're going to stay for a little while they get their orders, their final orders, to then deploy into Iran. So they're on their way now. They'll arrive very, very shortly. They may or may not be headed to Karg Island. I think not. I think that's going to be a Marine mission, a very badly planned Marine mission. I believe the 82nd is going to be doing something on another island or even on the mainland of Iran, but we shall just have to wait and see.
Yep, we'll be back tomorrow with this. So, thanks for today. Thanks for everyone for the great comments. We didn't really get around to the comments today. Tomorrow we will. I think it will. There'll be a lot of controversy around this as we flip back to Iran and what's happening there. And we'll pull more of your comments up tomorrow. But
same time tomorrow, folks. Join us here. Yeah.
Brilliant stuff.
All right. Take care. Cheers.